Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you today. The title of today's presentation is Introduction to Academic Publishing, and we will be talking about writing, submission, and successful publication of your work. My name is Despina Sanudu. My background is in molecular biology, genomics, and pharmacogenomics. My PhD was at the University of Cambridge. I was then an instructor at the Medical School of the University of Harvard, and I'm currently an associate professor, head of the Clinical Genomics and Pharmacogenomics unit at the Medical School of the University of Athens. Through these years of experience, I've accumulated uh, information, knowledge, and experiences that I'd like to share with you in the course of this presentation. I have served in the editorial board of different journals. I've submitted various manuscripts over the course of several decades now. So please let me start by presenting to you today's agenda, which will include a few words on the academic publishing landscape as it is shaping currently, tips on conceptualizing your research study, manuscript preparation advice, important notes on publication ethics, a description of the manuscript submission process and insights into manuscript decisions and how we go about handling them. So let's start with an overview of the academic publishing landscape to put things in perspective. Now, academic publishing is actually a complex ecosystem where many different individuals, institutions, foundations are involved. They all contribute and they all benefit in different ways, complementary to a large extent. So we have the researchers who are actually doing their different projects, performing their different projects, collecting new data, analyzing them, interpreting them, preparing and publishing, submitting the manuscripts. We have the different universities and research institutions whose reputation very much relies on the publication records of their researchers, their faculty. Then we have the funders and policymakers, again, who very much look into publications in order to assess how their different grants, the grants they have given out, are progressing, how progress is evolving. Then we have the libraries, which, as you are all very well aware, play a crucial role in the whole publication process and communication of that published knowledge to the scientific community and the general public. And then we have the publishers who are directly involved in this intermediate part of the process from the discovery of the knowledge to its communication to the scientific community and the general public. So many different individuals, organizations, and companies who are involved in this process. Now, where does everything start from? It starts from the funding that each country and different organizations are willing to put into research. So every country very much has their own agenda as to how they want to support R&D, research and development processes in their country. And you can see in this UNESCO Institute for Statistics map what funding has been invested towards research and development in different countries across the world. So, for example, you see that in Finland, there's a 3.1% of the GDP that's invested in research and development. So this translates into many millions of dollars if we are to talk in dollars. And you can see how this compares to other countries around the world. Of course, all this research needs to translate into patents, into publications, in order to ultimately translate into practice, whether this is clinical practice or other forms of practice, depending on the area. So publishing is an integral component of the translation of the discovery, the research discoveries, to practice, to daily practice. So publications can contribute in many different ways. One is directly to the advancement of science and research in itself. They definitely contribute to the personal development and career progression of the individuals, the scientists, the faculty members, the medical doctors, anyone who is performing those research projects and publishes their work, so the authors of the manuscript. But very importantly, publishing research contributes directly to clinical practice by communicating these findings to everyone involved in clinical practice and ultimately to public health who will benefit from using these findings, from integrating them in the healthcare system. Now, in terms of publications, every country has their own output, both in terms of number of publications, impact factors, the impact of their publications, the citations of their publications, the self-citations, and so on and so forth. And there's different databases who compile this information and make available the statistics. So for example, in your screen now, you can see the country rank from based on the SCImago journal statistics. And you can see, for example, how where Finland is ranking based on the research output in terms of publications for the time period between 1996 and 2020. So you can see that there are approximately almost 400,000, that's 392,000 different publications that have received a very large number of citations. So we're talking about 10 million citations. And you can see how this is ranking compared to other countries around the world. So this gives you an idea not only of where a country stands in the global scene, but also the fact that these databases and these statistics exist gives a clear message about how important this output is. Now, although publications are extremely important, not everything we do in research and not everything we prepare in terms of manuscripts gets published. In fact, very often manuscripts are rejected. Reasons for rejections, and here are some statistics so that one has a good feel as to what is going on in the field. Common reasons for rejection include poor or sloppy grammar, spelling, proofreading, inappropriate wording, the quality of English, papers being overwritten or underwritten, poor quality of data included in the manuscripts, errors that are sometimes found, ethical issues that may be encountered, and so on and so forth. There's a very broad range of different issues a manuscript can have. Possibly, it would be fair to say that one of the top reasons for a manuscript being rejected from a specific journal is that it is out of scope for that journal. The novelty is limited, or the quality of the work is not at the standards of the specific journal. And you can see more about these aspects and how important they are in terms of reasons for rejection in this table. So in this summary, you can see different types of rejection. So DR, PR, and ER stand for desk rejection. So right up front, PR is after peer review, and ER is after revisions where the editor ends up rejecting the manuscript. And you can see how for different reasons of rejection, the stage of rejection is different. And that also varies between different types of manuscripts, whether they're original research articles, review articles, or case reports. But it would be worth to note that when lack of novelty or lack of alignment with the scope of the journal is observed, then it's usually the editor who rejects the manuscript right up front. When it comes to rejections that have to do with poor presentation, poor quality of content, wrong conclusions, etc., then it's usually the reviewers who will pick that up and ask for major revisions or rejection of a manuscript. But let's see what we can do in order to prepare the best possible manuscript in order to present our work in the best possible way so that we can minimize the risks for rejection and expedite the process of publication. Now, when it comes to structuring your research paper, here are the main sections it needs to include. This will be the title, the abstract, introduction, methodology, results, discussion and conclusion, and then bibliography. Now, these are the sections that need to be included in a manuscript, but not necessarily the order in which they should be included. So let's see in more detail how we go about preparing each one of these sections, what do we put into it, and in what order we prepare them. The recommended order of preparing the sections is starting with your methodology. This is something you know very well, it's very clear to you, you have all the information. So prepare the methodology section first would be my recommendation. Then comes the results section, where you discuss what you have observed in the most objective possible way. Then we write the introduction, discussion, then the conclusions, and at the very end, we prepare our title and abstract for the manuscript. Let's look at each one of those steps though in detail because there's a lot to be said about how to best prepare each one of those sections. So methodology first. The methodology must include the details of animal, if you've done work on animal models or biological material, make sure you clearly describe which animal models, at what age, what gender, exactly what animals these were, or if it's biological material, all the details about what it is, how it was obtained, where, when it was obtained, details on the source of this biological material, etc. Very important, make sure that you describe, you mention which ethical guidelines you abided to, that you've obtained ethical approval, where you obtained it from, and so on and so forth. You need to provide full details of the experimental or sampling design, the reagents that you used, including brands, concentrations, incubation times, temperatures. The methodology section needs to be as detailed as necessary so that anyone who reads your manuscript can replicate exactly what you did and can obtain exactly the same results as you. So make sure you include in there everything that's necessary for them to be able to follow the same steps and get the same results. If you've used any advanced equipment, make sure you mention them, any advanced software and or settings, specific settings that were used for your analysis, especially if we're talking about more complex software with a lot of different setting possibilities. Again, settings for the hardware, if these were important. Talk about data analysis if this was part of your project, how you did it, describe in detail, again, which software, which tools, which algorithms, which parameters, which thresholds you used. Be very specific about the statistical analysis that you employed if you did so, and describe again exactly what algorithms or formulas you used. Again, if it's a more computational type of work that you will be describing in any part of your publication, make sure you provide full details for that too. When it comes to the results, these must include distinct sections for each subset of experiments and each subset of findings that you want to present. So each one of these subsections should have a clear aim for the subset of experiments. So why did you do this set of experiments? For each subsection of your results, okay, make sure you explain right up front in a sentence, no more than that, the rationale for this strategy. So what you did and why you did it. You're not describing now the methodology, but you're explaining to the reader why you choose to use this method to answer the specific question. And then present the details of your observations. In the results section is where you will also include figures, tables, diagrams, or anything else that's appropriate in order to show what the data you obtain from the experiments that you did. And when it comes to deciding how to present your data, it's important to aim for the best possible approach, tool, way to show these findings. So a figure is not always the best possible way to show what you observed. Sometimes it's a table, sometimes it's a diagram. Sometimes the best possible way is to just describe it in the text because it's so complex. So for every piece of evidence that you have, for every experiment that you did, you need to decide what's the best way to show the results to the reader. Sometimes you have to show the photograph of your results to demonstrate in the most objective way what you observed. Always make sure that the figures you prepare in tables are of the highest possible quality, high resolution, there's no manipulation of the photos, everything's at the appropriate size so that it can fit the pages of the journal. Be careful in your choice of colors, and keep in mind that sometimes diagrams are a very useful tool for conveying information. If needed, consider that supplementary material is always an option, at least in most journals. So keep in mind that every journal has a limit as to how many figures and how many tables can be included in the main text. So if you absolutely have to include more than what's allowed in the main text, the supplementary material section would be the place to include any additional ones. And then you will have to prioritize what's the most important to be included in the main text and what can be left for the supplementary material. Also, consider the obligation or the option, depending on the journal and on your data, of depositing data in public databases. For example, some journals have as a requirement that you first submit any raw genomics data, microarray data, next generation sequencing data, proteomics data to public databases, and to indicate in your manuscript the accession number for those publicly available now data. So keep in mind this parameter depending on the nature of your research projects and your data. Now, some principles of data presentation. You should be aiming at catching the reader's interest. So we need to present in the most objective fashion, but also in the most attractive fashion. And it's important to integrate those two considerations. Be concise without losing critical detail, and be very clear when you decide how to present, and also make sure your figures and tables are very clear. Make sure that they are attractive and easy to understand, so that when someone picks up the figure or the table and reads it, they don't need to read another page to understand what's shown there, but rather the figure and the table should speak in themselves. Now, as I mentioned already, there are three ways of data presentation. It could be in text, it could be in the form of tables or figures, and the figures could be photos, diagrams, graphs, schematics. Now, some tips for presentation. If you opt for textual presentation, then keep in mind that this is used usually to present both qualitative and quantitative information, only key information, in a simple manner. The data is organized such that each paragraph has a theme. Now, if you opt to use a figure, the figure should be your first choice if you want to display complex relationships such as patterns, trends, pathways. If you want to show photos, for example, from microscopy observations, etc. And figures very much assist towards clarifying and explaining the methods that were used. Now, tabular presentation is the best choice for summarizing, organizing, and condensing relatively complex quantitative data. It's useful to display actual values obtained in study results. So this quantitative parameter is best presented through tables. Now, once you've finished with the preparation of your methodology and results, we tend to start with the preparation of the discussion. So the introduction, I'm sorry if I used the wrong word, introduction. So for the introduction, we need to bear in mind that the introduction is there to explain why the research question we aimed at addressing is important, how it has been addressed, if it has been addressed so far in our field, how it has been addressed, and what aspects of it remain open and unanswered, and how we are aiming through this work to go about answering it. So include the appropriate background so the reader understands what the current status in the field is. What is the bigger problem being addressed? Why is it important? Why answering these scientific questions will help science and the general public? In what way? Include the information that's available to date without being too detailed, but without omitting key facts. Present the aims and hypotheses of your study, and of course, throughout your introduction, make sure you include appropriate citations wherever needed. Now, once the introduction is out of the way, then we go about to write the discussion of the manuscript. Now, the discussion needs to encapsulate the study design and the main outcomes in one first paragraph, and then in subsequent separate paragraphs, one can describe the major outcomes, the different major outcomes, and discuss them. In this context, we tend to discuss other related studies, what they observed, how this supports, complements, or disagrees to our findings. We need to discuss any unexpected observations and provide logical reasoning for any discrepancies. We need to make clear to the reader what our observations mean, how they contribute towards answering the question, and where do we go from here. So in the discussion where we present all the thinking, digestion, if you want, of the information and present it in an organized, easy to understand fashion for our reader. Our reader shouldn't have to do the interpretation themselves. We should have done this work and have it ready for them. If they want to question it, all the evidence will be there for them to question it, to doubt it, or to agree with it. But we need to have processed all the information, all the data, and present it in a clear fashion. Now, at this stage, after the discussion or towards the end of the discussion, often it's required by the journals, and other times it's just desired by authors to include some information on limitations of our study. For example, limitations that have to do with the study design, study population, sample size, study duration, the factors that we evaluated, the methodology, number of replicates, and so on and so forth. The reason for including this is so as to, first of all, acknowledge the fact that we are aware of it, but also to explain why this had to be this way in our study. And of course, at the end, we have the very important section of conclusions, where we summarize the key findings and highlights, and we talk about their short-term, medium-term, and long-term implications, along with how we see this information, these discoveries being taken forward in future studies. Then we have the abstract that needs to be prepared and the title. The abstract must convince the reader to keep reading. So remember that this is the first text from a manuscript that the readers will encounter. First the title, and then the text is the abstract. The abstract, in a way, it's a miniature of a manuscript. It tends to have an introductory sentence, a sentence or two about methodology, a few sentences on the results, and then a closing sentence with the conclusions. It needs to have sufficient detail without being extremely lengthy, and be presented in an attractive fashion so that the reader understands why this work was done, why it is important, what your findings are, and how this is making an important contribution in the field. Finally, the last thing to write is the title. as brief and easy as it would seem, is actually a difficult task. It needs to be very concise, it needs to be accurate, original, and captivating. It's important to use field-specific keywords and try in these few words to explicitly state the most important findings from your work. So this is why we leave the preparation of the title to the very end. Throughout your manuscript, you will be using citations, in-text citations, wherever you're referring to other people's work, or directly quoting someone else's work, or presenting some of their results in comparison, for example, to yours. Every journal has specific guidelines as to how these citations should be formatted, so make sure that you're aware what the requirements of the journal you're aiming at are and format accordingly. And the same goes for the bibliography, which will appear at the end of your manuscript and will list all the sources that you used during the preparation of your manuscript. So usually in the bibliography, independently of the format, the information that needs to be there includes the author, publisher, editor name, the title of the article or book or web page, date, page numbers, volumes, etc. Now, how these are ordered in each one of the bibliographical mentions varies, again, as I mentioned, according to the requirements of the journal. So this is just an example. For those of you who may not be familiar, this would be, for example, the Vancouver style citation, where you have the author names first, and you have up to 6 author names. If a manuscript has more than 6 authors, then you use et al. You proceed with the title of the manuscript, the name of the journal, year, volume, issue, pages, and the DOI. Now this would just be an example. Of course, there's many different styles for the formatting of citations, and luckily for all of us, there are also many different tools for formatting your citations, so you don't actually have to do it manually. You just use a reference management software, and through that you choose which referencing style you want to use in each manuscript you prepare. Some of these tools are for free, some of them are commercially available, so you have to pay a fee, and really each one of them has major advantages, and there's different pros and cons, but give them a try and identify which one works best for you. Now, a very important topic that I'd like to touch on in the time that we have available is publication ethics. It's a very important chapter and crucial to bear in mind. Now, there are some issues of major research misconduct that one must absolutely avoid throughout their career, not only throughout a project. There are major misconduct aspects that could actually ruin one's career. First of all would be data fabrication, fabricating data or results. So actually presenting findings that you did not really observe. 2 is falsification, is manipulating the research material and results so that it looks the way you want it rather than the way it actually is. These are major misconducts that would lead not only to a manuscript rejection or withdrawal, but could really lead you out of academia. Plagiarism is another huge no-no. Plagiarism would be using someone else's research process as results, words without giving due credit or obtaining permission as needed. Now, other types of misconduct to be very careful and aware of would be citation manipulation. So actually trying to include citations that you want rather than citations that are needed in different parts of your work. Allocation, inappropriate allocation of credit. So including as authors people who have not contributed, or excluding from authorship people who have worked towards a project, and the same goes for acknowledgements. Not declaring conflict of interest, going ahead with dual submissions or duplicate publication, copyright infringement, or salami slicing, taking a project and presenting it piece by piece in different manuscripts rather than the whole concept as a whole. Now, there are of course cases where all the different aspects of a project cannot be included in one single manuscript, and that's understandable and acceptable. But there are other times where people intentionally break a reasonably sized project into very small pieces and try to get more publications out of it on purpose. So one needs to be very careful to avoid any of these aspects of misconduct and to make sure that they do not take place even accidentally. Now, how do we avoid these major ethical issues? Make sure honesty characterizes every aspect of your work. Do not fabricate, falsify, or misinterpret while reporting. Scrutiny. Avoid human errors and negligence. Check, double check, triple check both what you're doing and what your colleagues are doing towards this manuscript. Respect for intellectual property. Give due credit wherever it's required. Honor intellectual properties in the form of patent, copyrights, etc. And make sure that your colleagues do so as well, your co-authors do so as well. Avoid bias. Adopt an unbiased and purely scientific approach to experimental design, data interpretation, and data presentation. All these three different levels. And now once you have your manuscript ready and you've ensured you did follow all the ethical guidelines, all the good practice guidelines, how do you go about submitting your work? Here are some useful tips towards this direction. First of all, you need to select which journal you will be using. Make sure that you choose a journal that matches the aim and scope of your work. Make sure that it's a journal that's accessible and easy to discover by people who are interested in your work, who are working in this field. So keep in mind that although a journal for some reason may appear very attractive to you, if it's completely out of your field, your colleagues in this field may not be able to come across it easily and therefore won't be able to enjoy, use the outcome of your work or cite your work. Assess the quality of different journals and make sure you aim high, you aim to high quality journals. And take into consideration the speed of each journal, speed to publish. So how long does it take from submission to publication? Usually you can find this information. Sometimes it may be a matter of weeks, months, and there are unfortunate circumstances where it can be over a year. And of course, take into consideration the cost of publishing. Do you have the funds necessary to publish in a specific journal, or what discounts may be available and if they apply to your case? Consider the publication model you prefer. Will you make your article open access? Will it be an open access journal? Will it be a subscription journal, etc.? And then go forward with making a short list of the journals that would be a good home for your work, and decide together with your co-authors where you would prefer to submit, or submit first, if I may. So have this list available because in case rejection comes, you will have your second and third option ready. Now, what material do we need to have ready prior to logging into the journal's website and starting to upload our material? We need to have the completed manuscript with title, abstract, keywords, all the main text. We need to have the tables and the figures in the format that's required by the specific journal. Whether they're grouped together, they're separate, they're JPEG, they're PDFs, they're TIFF files, the journal will have specific instructions as to how they want you to prepare each one of those files. Then you need to make sure you have a cover letter available, and this will be a letter to the editor asking them to consider your work and saying a few words about your work and its significance. Make sure that you have all the necessary approvals to proceed with the submission. So you've discussed the manuscript with all your co-authors. You have given due credit to anyone who contributed. You have not added authors who did not contribute to this work. Make sure that you have their approval for the final version of the manuscript, and that you've looked into any copyright permissions that may be needed before you publish this work. If you are to be including supplementary files, make sure you have these prepared, formatted appropriately, checked the same way with the same scrutiny as you do for the main manuscript, and that they're in the right file type for uploading. A few words for the cover letter, as this is an important document that you will be submitting. The usual format looks something like this. You have the date of submission, editor's name, title, journal's name, and then you start your letter, dear editor, and you start by including the manuscript title, the type of paper. You indicate that you want to submit it in the journal, and then you say a few words why you believe that this work is in the scope of the journal, why the readers of this journal will be interested in reading it, what are your key findings and why these are important in the field, just in a few sentences. Make sure that the cover letter is very polite and very clear, and definitely well written in terms of English grammar and spelling. Now, each different journal has their submission, their online submission system, so you will figure your way out each one of the submission platforms. And then what's the process once you've clicked the submit button? The article gets assessed by the editor, who will be the first one to decide whether this should be rejected or it can be sent to reviewers. If it is sent to reviewers, then they will prepare an assessment and express a decision whether it is accepted, whether it requires revisions, or if it's rejected. Now, if it requires revisions, this feedback will be sent back to you along with a decision of major revisions required, reject but may resubmit, or minor revisions. In this case, you need to be fast and careful in revising your manuscript, and we will talk a little bit more about that. The revised manuscript is sent back to the reviewers, and again, they will decide. So once accepted, your manuscript goes on to production and publication. Now, let's look a little bit more into the different manuscript decisions and how we handle each one of those. In, I would say, the less frequent cases, a decision of accept may come to you right away. This is a fantastic scenario where you deserve many, many congratulations. It's not the most frequently encountered scenario to get a direct acceptance of your work, but it does happen. And I certainly wish that it happens to all of you all the time, if possible. Now, there are cases where a very good outcome would be minor revisions, so small revisions that you need to make. Another very common scenario is to get feedback for major revisions, where you may be needing to make more in-depth revisions that could include additional experiments, rewriting of sections, removal of parts of the manuscript, addition of others, etc. So this would take more time, and it could be considerably more time. It could be a rejection with invitation to resubmit, which means that this tends to be called a soft rejection, and generally means that a lot of further work needs to be done. So they're giving you ample time to go ahead and perform this additional work, revise your manuscript and resubmit if you want. And then there's the hard rejection, where you're told basically that this manuscript cannot be accepted in any form for publication in this journal. In the last scenario, of course, is where you will reconsider the content of your manuscript and, if you want, revise and proceed with submission to another journal. So the usual reasons for manuscript rejection, although there's many different reasons, but the main ones at the editorial level would be that the manuscript is not within the scope of the journal. If dual submission is noted to another journal, that the manuscript is poorly written and not easy to understand, it does not adhere to journal's guidelines, or it has limited novelty to the extent that the editor can assess. Now, once it has been sent out to reviewers, or even by the editor if they want to do the scientific assessment as well, it could be reasons for rejection could be that the research does not add value to the journal, the hypothesis of the study is not clear, the novelty is limited, the evidence that is provided in this manuscript is not sufficient, clear, or appropriate to support the conclusions. The analysis is incomplete or inappropriate. The results may be inconclusive, appear inconclusive. The methodology may be considered incorrect, or of course, if there's violation of research ethics. Now, if you fall under the scenarios where revisions have been requested, here are some tips that I'd like to share with you. Now, first of all, read and reread reviewer comments very carefully. Make sure that you're entirely clear as to what they mean. Decide if you can address each one of the comments, and you can actually make a checklist so that you decide up front which of these comments can be addressed by you experimentally or by rewriting or by providing bibliography, and which ones cannot be addressed. Decide how much time you need to address the different comments, and check if the time the journal has allocated for revisions is sufficient. You will have to do your best to abide this deadline, and only under exceptional circumstances you can ask for an extension, but this may not always be granted. So do your best to meet the deadline for revisions. Another advice would be to group reviewer comments. Sometimes multiple reviewers may be commenting about the same thing or about the same part of a manuscript. So group these comments together and try to address them in a smooth fashion. Now, there are cases where different reviewers may be asking for different things for the same section of the manuscript. Then it gets trickier, and it comes down to what you feel is best for your project and your manuscript. Then make a list of changes that you need to make to this manuscript. Make a list of the ones that are minor, rewriting, language improvement, the ones that require more analysis or more writing work, such as addition of data, figures, modifications in the text, and any major additional work you will need to do, such as, for example, additional experiments or inclusion of more samples or more cases in your work. Once you've addressed everything, then you need to prepare an extremely polite response to reviewers, where you will be addressing and responding to their comments one by one for each reviewer separately. So this, in some cases, can be a very lengthy document, but this is the right way to do it. So you copy paste the reviewer's comments and you add the answer, your answer, under each one of their comments, and you indicate next to your answer in which pages and sentences of the manuscript you've addressed this comment. So in this process, you may come across reviewer comments that you disagree with, and that's okay. it's fine to disagree as long as you can provide the evidence that come either from your experimental work, from previous experimental work, or from bibliography that support your view. So you can't just disagree for the sake of disagreeing. You need to prove why you have a different opinion. Ensure you've made all the suggested changes by the reviewers, and if you haven't, make very clear and be very careful about explaining why you have not made a specific change they requested. Make sure your response is very clear and indicate in a clear fashion in the manuscript where these changes were incorporated. So the journal may ask for the submission of a revised manuscript that contains track changes or highlights in all the places where you made revisions. So some tips, take-home tips. Peer reviewers' comments are the first step towards acceptance. So consider them very carefully and respond to each and every comment with clarity. Be comprehensive, yet succinct, and very, very, very polite. This is extremely important because sometimes, in rare occasions, we encounter reviewer comments that don't feel very polite and we're tempted to respond in an impolite way. That's the wrong way to go about it. Make sure that you do your best to answer in a professional and scientific fashion. So with that, we're coming to the end of this presentation. I would like to thank you for your attention, to wish you every luck in your upcoming publication.